Hi, everyone. We're so glad you're here. I'm Kari McClain with Integral, and I'm really glad that you could join us for today's session on our Employee Activation Index that we conducted with the Harris poll. So we encourage you to put your LinkedIn profile into the chat so you can introduce yourself to the other people that are on there. And to kick us off, I want to just introduce you to our two presenters. Ethan McCarty, the founder and CEO of Integral, and Rob Jekielek, managing director at the Harris poll, who led the study for us. We're going to start with Ethan and Rob sharing some of the key highlights and findings that we found were surprising from our index. And then we ask you to put your questions along the way into the Q&A, and we will get to those questions in about 30 minutes. And so we'll get started. So Ethan, Rob, take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Kari. I really appreciate it. So it's such an important time for us to be thinking about our relationship with work and with the workplace and with our employees and colleagues. And I mean, it is really something that Integral does. I mean, we are an employee activation organization. It's what we do for our clients. We help with employee communications, with digital transformation efforts, with culture and change programs, but we've all had the most profound kind of culture and change program ever over the last 18 months or so for obvious reasons. And it motivated us, compelled us really to say, can we take stock of where we are? And so we fielded this study with the Harris poll and probed on a number of issues. How do people see their own identity? How do they take stock of their relationship with their employers? What's the play of societal issues and political issues in the workplace? And what impact does that have on how we'll actually show up as employees, as colleagues, as members of society? And for employers, how can employers take that understanding, make the best sense of it, and create some strategic advantage for themselves, as well as activating their workforce in positive ways? So we fielded this study, the Integral Employee Activation Index, which covers many generations, several thousand people. And we learned quite a lot, and we're eager to share some of that with you today. Rob, do you mind talking a little bit about how we fielded the study, what's in there, who we reached out to?
Thanks, Ethan. First of all, I just wanted to welcome everyone on the call. What an esteemed group of attendees. It looks fantastic. It's going to be a really exciting conversation, and really hoping for some pointed questions towards the end. So the study was fielded a little bit earlier this summer. It's a representation of over 2,000 employed Americans. It's a great representation both across generations, mindsets, societal and political issues, as well as ethnicity, right? So, again, best in class sample, and really some very thoughtful questions that we were really, it was a lot of fun working with the Integral team. Many of you, I'm sure that already work with Integral have seen the kind of dynamic energy they bring to the mix. So this study was much of the same. So again, good representation of background, great representation of generation, all areas that we certainly want to dig into in terms of today's conversation.
One of the things that we asked folks was to take a look at a list of 25 societal and political issues. And we asked them to pick 5 that were really important for them to see their employers take a stand on and make a positive difference on. You can see the total list here. But the top 5 were, I mean, really, to me, revelatory in certain ways. So the top one overall is employees are looking for, we're looking for our employers to take a stand on and make a difference on our good health and well-being. And that's followed by job creation. And so one of the things that we've been discussing internally is, well, maybe we're in this moment where so many institutions that we have grown up relying upon are overburdened at their max. They're not meeting our needs, whether it's a overburdened healthcare system or a police department or the Congress of the United States, there are so many systems that are under so much stress, and yet it's potentially our employers who can step in and help to take care of us. And then, kind of unsurprisingly, racial inequity, discrimination, hate crimes, bias, that came solidly up at the top as well. And I think it's reflective of a moment that we're in as a society. And the one that I would say kind of leapt off the page to us is around data privacy. We did not anticipate that one ranking in the top 5, but our internal discussion was like, okay, well, this kind of makes sense. Who has more data on you than your employer? I mean, even your doctor doesn't know what you get paid, and so data privacy is incredibly important to employees. And then last but not least, in the top 5 is gender, wage, and leadership gap. So the number of women in leadership roles and the compensation for women. And I would say probably the most exciting thing about this particular ranking is that issue was ranked evenly by men and women. So 50%-ish men, 50% women ranked those. Rob, you conduct a lot of studies across other domains. Where do you see some of these data points netting out in your broader view?
Yeah, really some interesting insights here when you overlay an employee-based perspective on the world. As you said, Ethan, we do tons of research with voters, with the public. Lots recently, for example, on stakeholder capitalism. Right. So I think that, we're actually talking here to the central employee of stakeholder capitalism, which is employees. So like a really unique lens. You see healthcare, you see the economy, you say racial inequality. These are all core macro themes, and you can see how clearly they're coming through with employees. Data privacy is the one that I think is really interesting because maybe it hasn't, across the board, hasn't been trending as much. Certainly if you're in tech, if you're in financial services, data privacy is always like top of mind. But when you think of employees, exactly as you said, Ethan, this is a critical element, right? It's a different lens on data privacy that every company should really be thinking about how they're addressing, because it's sitting there at least back of mind, right? There's a lot of these other things that are maybe more kind of like, sparking the front of your brain, but anything that goes wrong on data privacy with your employees is going to be a very big problem.
And what's interesting about that too, Rob, I mean, just to translate it into the kind of work that we do, and that I suspect the people who are on this call are doing with their employee populations, it's often, the lens is often like, how are you going to protect the institution's data? How are you going to put into good practice and understanding of phishing scams and so on? But what this indicates is it's going to be equally important for employers to say, yeah, we care about your data as an individual as well.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that if you don't think about it, if you don't bring it front of mind, it's not going to be addressed until there's a problem, right? Yeah. It's certainly one of those things. It may not be your lead story, but if you're not working your operations team with your HR team and having a proactive kind of perspective on this, so you're ready for it, you're addressing concerns early, right? It's going to be a problem, right? Big opportunity, inverse.
Yeah, and one of the themes that we kept finding as well, and you're going to see where we start to get into, we probed a lot on whether or not employees believe their employers' values are aligned with their personal values. And again, we see that employees are more likely to do kind of pro-social positive actions on behalf of their employer if they feel like their values align. Up to and including staying at the organization or choosing to leave the organization. But on these various issues, we do see some variation in what people care about and say they rank highly, and how they declare their own racial identity. Do you want to talk about that just for a second? There's some variation there. What do you see?
I think there's two things, right? Certainly there is variation. There's also quite a bit of consistency, right? So yeah. I think there's two highlights on here. When you look at, for example, issues like racial inequity, when you look at access to education, you can see some, and even sexual harassment, you're seeing some places where there's almost like 2-to-1s, right? Where you have certain ethnicities that are twice as likely or half as likely to think of this as a critical issue for employers. as you look at the top issue, employee good health and well-being, this is very consistent, right?
Yeah.
You don't see a surge, right? The one place where the top issue changes dramatically, and I'm sure is very apparent to anyone in America today, is racial inequity with Black and African Americans.
Thanks for that. So when it comes to talking about your political views at work, it's a pretty divided topic. I mean, it seems like everything is polarized these days. Even the act of being polarized seems to be polarized. So whether or not people are willing to talk about their politics and their sort of political views at work, and whether or not they think they should be able to or feel comfortable, it's pretty much a 50-50 split. However, millennials do tend to say they feel more strongly about articulating their points of view politically at work, and baby boomers are a bit less likely to do so. So that's something you're going to want to really navigate carefully in the workplace. This, to me, this is one of the most profound slides, where 64% of people who we asked said that the organization does reflect my values. And when I first saw this, I was like, Rob, that's great. It's a majority. And then, and then Rob, you said,
I was like, that's a ton of people, right? Like, let's flip the script here a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's there's a lot of people who introduce themselves on the call here. We're not talking about like 100 employees. We're talking about tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of employees, right? 36% of people that, as we unpack the data, are not feeling great, are not motivated to go above and beyond for you, is very problematic. It's extraordinarily problematic. That's kind of like, that's a strategy crusher, right? As you talk about, culture eats strategy for lunch, right?
Yeah.
So think about that.
Absolutely. And it has really, really high impact on a lot of things. So for example, the folks who say that their personal values are reflected in their organization's values, you can see they're overwhelmingly more likely to show up feeling confident, grateful, motivated. And you can imagine, you don't have to imagine, how that translates into quality of work, attention to safety, attention to your customers' needs, and so on. And then on the flip side of that, it's like 2.5 times. People are 2.5 times more likely to feel tired, indifferent, or unappreciated when they show up to work feeling as though their employer does not reflect their values.
So I just want to hit on,
yeah.
So Ethan, on that slide, right? I think this one, just as you hit, it's just such a critical piece of it, right? So when someone wakes up in the morning, right? Like, how are they feeling? They have to, deal with their roommates. They have to deal with their family. They have to deal with their kids, right? What is their reaction to things if they're tired, indifferent, and feeling underappreciated at work versus getting up in the morning, confident, grateful, and motivated, right? Just game changer for, especially right now when people have these heightened levels of kind of anxiety on everything.
Yeah, and it's so important, I think, and this is one of the insights of this whole study, is that understanding what your employees' values are may be more important. It's certainly as important, but maybe more important than ensuring that employees understand what your company values are. And so we see that actually play out in the behaviors that people would say their colleagues would do. So if you feel that your organization reflects your values, you're overwhelmingly more likely to think that you and your team are going to stay with the organization, go the extra mile for a client, help somebody outside of your immediate team, or if there was some crisis facing the organization, to defend the organization, and then also to start to take proactive measures to, like, mentor people, volunteer, participate in a charitable campaign. So you can see that values alignment is extraordinarily important in terms of the actions that people will take. And then also, I want to just go back to you, Rob, on the culture point, on how people actually see their culture. Do you want to talk about this for a second?
Yeah, I mean, the ratio that we want everyone to leave this call with is 2 to 1, 2x, right? 2x feeling much better, going out of your way to do more, feeling better about the culture, right? feeling supportive, a feeling that the culture is supportive, safe, caring, purposeful, innovative, always learning, collaborative, fun, stimulating, right? Who does not want to work for a company that embodies all of those things, right? So, and what the data indicates is every company has the potential to be doing this, right? How do we take advantage of that opportunity? It's a 2-to-1 opportunity, 2 times.
Yeah, and in this moment when the headlines are all talking about the Great Resignation, I mean, this is the big unlock. It's like, does your organization actually understand its people and reflect their values? Well, that's a pretty good step. If you can answer that question in the affirmative, that's a pretty good step towards taking a measure against the Great Resignation and not just retaining your best people, but really motivating them to advocate on behalf of the organization. One way that we often help our clients to activate their employees on behalf of the organization is around online reviews of that organization as an employer. And one of the things we found is there's a great deal of people in everybody's organization and everybody's company ready to give a good review of the company as an employer. And there has been, we find this all the time. There's a lot of trepidation. Oh, well, we don't want to ask, or what if we ask people wrong, or what if we get in trouble? This slide alone, while it does show that baby boomers are a bit less likely to go and write that review, but generally speaking, across the board, you can be pretty sure that if you solicit recommendations, folks are ready to give them. Another split that we found is the difference between folks who have children in the household and folks who don't have children in the household can be a very big differentiator on whether or not they'll take action either on behalf of or even against their organization. So you can see there's a big difference. It's much more likely if you've got kids in the household that you're going to be willing to mentor, participate in charity or volunteer program, or even buy the company's stock. But you're also twice as likely to advocate for unionization or warn somebody that place isn't a great place to work, or even to proactively go and write a negative review. Another thing that we found about, oh, sorry, Rob, go ahead.
No. The 2 things I'll hit in here, right?
Yeah.
Is that I think there's the data really in particular indicates the motivation to positive behavior on the values piece. There's, as we're looking at some of the more negative behaviors, these are absolutely lightning rod issues, right? To also just be really thinking about these. This is why systems to identify these things early, often, ways for employees to kind of be able to anonymously talk about these things. Because if somebody sees really bad behavior, irrespective of values or whatever, it's a big deal. Right.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that we're like, a lot of the very negative behaviors on here, we need to address in the bud. Also, just the parent thing, like we see this across a lot of research, right? Parents, for better or for worse, it's not a guarantee, but they tend to be much more empathetic to the world, right? It's just kind of like you have these kids and suddenly you're looking at the world in a very different lens, which again, in many cases motivates different kinds of behaviors. So
yeah, and we should also just be clear. We don't know if the folks without kids in the household, they may be parents. They may, their children may have moved out. So we don't know that for sure. So there is some variability in there. But we did find some I don't know. From my own personal experience, I find these kind of funny. The folks with kids in the household much less likely to want to work remotely forever. With my 6 and 9-year-old nuclear powered sons, I can tell you I was very happy to come back to this office. And then also people with kids in the household are a little bit less likely to show up at work feeling tired. And my hypothesis there is based on my own experience. When I start reading my kids' bedtime stories at 8:30, I usually fall asleep with them. So maybe I'm getting a little bit more sleep than folks without small children. I don't know, but what the mindset that people show up to work with really does drive the behavior. We were talking about some of those positive mindsets that people express, the likelihood that they feel loyal to the organization, and then there's a strong correlation, as you can see down to the bottom there, that they're going to remain with the organization over the next 6 to 12 months. Now, this is our baseline. This is the first time we've run this study, so we don't know if this is artificially low because of the moment we're in with the pandemic. We're going to know a lot better next year when we run this survey again, I hope. But I want to go back to Rob. We were talking about some of these negative behaviors that can be expressed. And again, it is pretty important that we understand our employees' values and expectations of the organization, and that we take action on them. Because when we don't, it really increases the likelihood that somebody's going to say, yeah, my teammate would warn a candidate away, or would quit, or would skip safety protocols, or you can imagine, like if you're in food service, how important that is, or if you're in healthcare, how important that is to adhere to those safety protocols. Or you can see 20% saying that a teammate would disclose confidential information. I mean, can you imagine in a security business, or in banking, or in anything that has to do with that critical confidential information? And then the one that was, I would say, the most surprising to all of us, I mean, we almost put this in here on a lark, would you openly, sabotage the organization? And we were very surprised to see a double-digit number come back there. When you feel misaligned, 17% of people would say a teammate would sabotage the organization. Yep.
No, it's critical. I mean, again, you need to have the right value system in place. B, you also need to have transparency on these things, right? You absolutely need to make sure that employees have the ability to kind of address and anonymously kind of provide information about these things. So you as a company can get involved early versus, and in many cases, finding out some bad thing that's happening in some sprawling part of your organization that you're not aware of, right? Like you need to be able to address these things, but the values piece cannot be overstated.
That's right. That's right. We're going to go through a couple more data points, and then we'll turn our attention to the questions here. There is some variation, as you can see, across generations for how people perceive the culture at the organization. So these splits are not like crazy multiples of each other. But if you look, you see that people do if you look at that fun dimension, like, do I believe that my culture at work is fun? Baby boomers, single digit, and then the Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, double digit. Rob, any thoughts on how these spread out by generation?
I think there's two important insights here, right? One is each of these generations often come into an organization or in an organization with a certain mindset and set of expectations. Secondarily, there's a lot of these kinds of aspects and kind of programs that support these things that, the data would indicate are certainly kind of more focused on certain generations versus others, right? I think the fun one, which is kind of like, 2-to-1, almost 3-to-1 Gen Z versus baby boomers, you A, get a good sense of both the, mindset of coming to work, but then B, that, there's likely a lot more of fun programming that's being targeted at one group versus the other, right? So what do you make of that, and how does that, like, is that the right balance at your organization or not, right? How do you take advantage of how people are feeling and what you want them to feel, and what really drives productivity?
And for those of you who want some more detail on this and how to turn it into action, download the report, and you're going to see that across different generations, there's a different level of desire to participate in things like outside of work, social activities, or volunteer efforts. And there's some really good insight there to help you tune your programs. So what are you actually offering employees of your firm to demonstrate that your values are aligned? I mean, it can, rather than doing the drinks night, maybe it's about going to an art museum, or cleaning up the neighborhood park, or doing some mentoring to students in a underserviced area near you. So there's a lot of ways to translate these insights into actual programs. I hope that everybody saw that. Taylor, I saw you put the link to the study in the chat, so thank you for doing that. Of course, we're going to follow up with the webinar link and replay here. What I'm going to do right now is just stop sharing the screen for a second and turn to, I see we've got several comments in the chat and questions. And let me just read a couple of these. So let's start with one from Charles. Thanks for that. On the question of an organization reflecting employees' values, should we understand values there to mean interpersonal values, like being supportive, humane, etc., Or does it also refer to politics, like my employer takes a stand on societal issues? Well, I think that's a really good question. And I don't know that we used the word values, and then we did ask those questions kind of separately. Do you have a hypothesis around that, Rob? I think probably those concepts are a bit conflated from a respondent's point of view.
I think they can be, right. And I was going to say, I can tell you what this research and other research that we do indicates. And I think it actually, one of the things that excited me about is that I think it really sets up a lot of the work you guys do, right? Like when we think of values, the big thing is not like what you say, you think, or believe. It's like what you actually do and how the workplace actually works, right? Like how employees are activated, right? So if you're activated in terms of indifference, that's a certain set of values that are coming forward, right? If you're activated in terms of much more positive and proactive ways versus very negative ways versus ambivalent and like in different ways, that's a totally different thing. But generally speaking, it's, to what degree do you have like a set of very clear things that you believe in, and to what degree are those actually being supported by action, right? So certainly engagement on social issues can be a value driver, if you will. I will say strongly from the research we've been doing, it needs to be supported by action versus just kind of saying like some sort of like a forgiveness statement or just like a policy. Like often that falls flat if not actually doing the opposite of what you intended to do.
I was talking with a friend last night about this study, and saying, 20 years ago when I started doing values work at an organization, it was IBM at the time, it was like pretty out there to say, look, not only are we going to have values as a poster on the wall, but we're going to do this big jam, and we do this big collaborative event. We're going to ask input on the company values from the employees. I mean, that was like way, way out there, but it was still kind of edgy for an organization to declare values at all. And, but I think what's happening here is we really need to go to a further extreme and say, yeah, actually, the organization's values are not just co-created with employee input, but it may be the point of departure needs to be the employee input. Like that's the starting place, not just one input. John asks, how should companies dig deeper to evaluate their employees' likelihood for taking negative action and even create programs to improve any negative sentiment? So it's a great question. And I would say that the first thing that organizations need to do is to be actively listening on an ongoing basis. I think there's a lot of kind of spray and pray communications that go on within organizations. You put a bunch of stuff out there, you make a lot of declaration, and then there's very little of that feedback loop. And it's in that feedback. The feedback loop does a couple things. First of all, by asking and understanding, employees feel heard, and you saw how important it was. A top-ranked cultural descriptor was supportive. So, if I feel supported and I feel safe in my organization, I'm much less likely to go towards those negative actions. So that's a very important one. And then simultaneously, I would say it's super important, as you were just saying, Rob, to translate those not just into declarations, but into actions. Is the policy, is the policy that is problematic justified? If it's not, is it changing? Is the resource available to employees adequate? If not, is it being augmented? I'd say the top three things. First of all, having some alignment at the most senior level around employee experience. Is that a priority? It's very hard to imagine any organization's people producing a great product or producing a safe environment for customers or producing a great customer experience if their own experience is one that is shoddy, unsafe, unsupportive. And then secondly, really having a shared set of outcomes that you're driving towards and a plan to make that improve over time. Do we understand employees? Are we meeting them where they are? Are we producing an experience for them that will equip them to go and create the kind of outcomes for our business that we want. Excellent product development, innovation, fantastic patient care or customer care or what have you. And then last but not least, doing that ongoing listening, it needs to be rolling, and whether that's, focus groups, conversations, manager activation, roundtables, surveys. There are so many different ways to bring that to life. Those are the table stakes now, much more so, I would say, than information dissemination. The ability to share a lot of content to employees, still important, but that's not the bedrock of what's going to give organizations a strategic advantage in this environment. I don't see other questions here, but I'd be delighted if any others came in. One just came in. Rob, let me read it aloud and we'll see what we got here from Shayna, whose name is spelled exactly as my sister's name. Oftentimes, there are value and culture issues within an organization due to a lack of modeling from staff at all levels, including leadership. Do you have any insights on how to get everyone within an organization aligned and ensure healthy, accountable leadership, as they are often the drivers or deterrent of stated values? And that's getting a thumbs up. That one might be for me, but Rob, I'm interested to hear if you've got a take on it. I know you work with a lot of large organizations and their leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, one of the things that I think has been, as people have been working more virtually a lot, like one of the things that I've seen as a positive byproduct of that has been, not in all cases, but with a lot of companies, is much more consistent and better CEO engagement across companies, which I think has been really helpful, right? There's some CEOs who are kind of naturally inclined to doing these things. There's others who aren't. But just being able to kind of like hear, see, feel a little bit more about, the leader of the company. It's not the silver bullet answer, but it's an ingredient that can help pretty dramatically when you're thinking of kind of like modeling behavior, right? And CEOs being able to talk about the strategy, how that's being pulled forward by, specific initiatives, specific employees. That's a great opportunity for kind of, addressing some of what I think was asked about in the question. Not a silver bullet answer, but one that I've seen have a lot of impact during, the last 18 months or so.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's really right. I mean, we work with a number of CEOs directly where they have made a commitment based on their desire to have a healthier culture to communicate frequently and authentically. And not just to talk about the business outcomes, but to talk about business outcomes in the context of their mission, in the context of their personal experiences. You were just saying, their own vulnerability, in the context of their own interpretation of the company's values. Like, why are these values important to me? Well, let me tell you. And so, and this is one of the things I think is wonderful about, the world in which we work with communications leaders and HR leaders and marketing leaders is, to be able to help those senior leaders to come across and make the values a priority is that's the kind of that's the silver bullet. I think is like we've got that capacity and that capability. I also think ensuring that the CEO asks other people, like, is there a forum? Can you do ask me anything kind of thing? He or she doesn't need to have the right answers, but the act of asking is incredibly powerful. I see two more questions in here right now. So one is from Alexandra. Thanks for the question. She asks, how do employees want to engage with company values? For instance, does technology create another wall or burden for employees? Or do employees prefer technology-based experience like social or video over experiential or physically interactive ones? So we didn't ask those kind of questions in our study. But we did ask folks about their experience at work and those who have worked remotely versus not remotely. And I didn't, and this is something we'll have to go back to, but I don't think there was a great difference in perceptions of culture between those who are sort of interacting primarily through digital versus those who are on site. And I will say that our approach at Integral has been to say, look, you're going to now, we're in the super hybrid workplace probably forever. And so be thinking about and create programs that allow people to participate in your organization's culture and social interactions, no matter how they're interacting. And reaching out through first line managers is as important as ever. There's probably a whole new role for first line managers to convene groups and activate them as clusters of people, as like mini communities in each team. And then all the way down to things like ensuring your, even the naming of your HR programs, all the way up to, why people get and how people get compensated, making sure that those programs are really geared into what your stated values are.
Yeah. I would put a plus on that, right? I think that as you're looking at the world today, again, there's lots of different research we've been doing around this. You've certainly seen the news every once in the store, like a story about employers saying employees are taking advantage of this virtual reality and they're they're slacking off. I would say that that's kind of like the 1 or 2% like of anything we're seeing, if anything.
Yeah.
I think some of the things that I found startling in some other research we've been doing is that, the virtual reality actually works very well for certain types of people, especially if you're trying to in collaborative settings. If you're in person, there are certain archetypes of people who end up kind of, running the show, if you will, right? And whose voices are really the predominant ones. There's a lot about virtual technology that can actually be very helpful and additive. I also think we're at the very beginning of the journey of figuring out how does that work as a complement to kind of physical settings. Yeah. But I think there are certain things that are big potential advantages for a variety of different employees, right? And again, it could be things like as just pure archetype to actual disabilities and things like that. It's a really high impact.
And globally, like across cultures too. This is one of the things as well that is a huge unlock in this moment for connecting people to the values and culture of an organization. So much of that historically has been art, can you be in headquarters every day and what's hanging on the wall there, versus now where there's a lot less pressure on that, or a different kind of pressure, I should say. And there's an opportunity, like you said, additive. And I love what Lisa Reddy wrote in the chat about it's not a one size fits all approach. And I think that's one of the key insights I would say of this whole study, is that we have to take some of the learnings from market segmentation and be applying them to employee populations. Just because everybody works at a company, whether you've got 10 people, 100 people, or 150,000 people, there's going to be differentiation. There's going to be people who cluster in various ways and find each other kind of you find your own people. You may be in a group of people that have a shared interest or a shared passion or a shared skill set, and being able to address those groups with some level of personalization is imperative. I've got one last question here from Colin. We're happy to take another one if anybody has one. Colin, thank you for your question. I love the thoughts on maintaining the feedback loop about strategy and values. How have you seen organizations showing rather than telling employees that their feedback is being heard by acting on it? And how do you bring those value-based thoughts into business rhythms? I love this question. There's one of our clients that we've been working with for over a year now, a very, very big technology firm, doing a very significant transformative effort that affects about 5,000, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people in the organization. We've helped them to develop a ongoing listening program, very lightweight, but it's repetitive in that every week it can be anticipated that people are going to get a question in their inbox and have an opportunity to give some feedback. And then there's some ongoing employee listening and focus groups as well. And the outcomes from those, from that listening program literally populates the management teams, the leadership teams backlog, of actions that they're going to take, which is visible to everybody in this group. And so this is very effective. So we're doing this ongoing listening. After a very short time of analysis, a day or two, an action item ends up on the management team's backlog, which is visible. So building that cadence, and this is just a best practice. Historically, I think, Colin, you'll find that pretty much every organization that does, like even if you're doing an old school, every 2 years employee perception survey, is probably followed by a cadence of, okay, and then let's bring some action plans. So I think it's really, really important. And I think building questions about what do you value, where would you like to see us put our resources, those are really good questions to ask that you can then translate into action from leadership.
Yeah. I mean, again, I would just give that a plus on there, right? I mean, I think it's such an important question. And I mean, I would just reinforce, and hopefully I'm just kind of fueling a little bit of extra Ethan fire here, right? But it's like when you're talking about those kinds of initiatives, internal communications is just so mission critical, right? Like there's often, if you have business leaders, they're like, oh yeah, we talked about that. Like we told people about that like 6 months ago. Why
we sent the email, right?
Like why are people still asking us questions about that, right? Like,
yeah.
Nobody remembers. Nobody if it's something that's important and you're reinforcing something that you've heard from a lot of employees, it's mission critical to reinforce it because many people may have not even realized that it's happened, and it makes a difference. A, because they can take advantage of it, and B, because it's really important to just reinforce that you care, that you give a crap, right? Like that's a big deal. So.
It is so lovely to see a familiar name here, and I've seen several today in the questions, so thank you for that. But Anna Sylvia, it's a pleasure to see your name. A former colleague of mine from IBM asks how to keep a good level of employee motivation in a moment of fast transformation, cost reduction. Are values enough when it's difficult to maintain promises in the real and business life? And I think the answer is no. Values are not enough. Stating them, saying them, putting the poster on the wall is not enough. Living them is necessary. And there are business decisions that have to happen around cost reduction and prioritization. And I guess the message to leaders making those decisions is don't be penny wise, pound foolish. If you make compromises on the employee experience, if you make compromises on your organization's integrity in order to meet a financial number, you're probably going to have to pay the piper at some point. You're either going to lose some of your very best talent, or you're going to see some of those behaviors that we talked about earlier, the negative behaviors emerge. People will become careless, less likely to innovate and take healthy risks at work, less likely to put in that extra effort to mentor someone or spend that extra time with a customer. So no, it's not enough to just communicate values. They have to be, they have to be a critical and first input to business, to the business decisions and to the business strategy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you can't translate and showcase to your employees in a point of massive transformation that we're all in it together, we're all going to benefit from this, and show that in a way that's very compelling, you're going to lose your top talent, right?
Yeah.
And like again, adding on what Ethan said, it's not enough to just talk about values, but again, in all the data that we just presented, it's like a 2-to-1, right? So one of the questions was specifically around challenging times, right? It's a 2-to-1 ratio. So it's not the only thing, but it's a critical ingredient. If people don't feel that you're in it with them, that everybody's in it together, it's going to be a big problem.
Absolutely. Rob, thank you for that insight. I think it is really important to show that we're going to cohere as a team, right? So I want to thank everybody for attending, but most of all, Rob, I want to thank you for your fabulous partnership, and I hope everybody will take a chance to take a look at the full study. Kari, I want to thank you and the whole team at Integral who have done so much great work to put this together. We plan to continue to mine this data for insights. We've got a whole series of kind of deep dives that we're producing that I think you're going to enjoy reading and get a lot out of. And with that, thank you again, Rob. Any little last high five or something?
Definitely a high five. One of my and our favorite project this year. You have a really dynamic team, Ethan.
Thank you.
Kudos to you and everyone. It was a lot of fun.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day. Take care.